Hey everyone, let me double check to see that yes, I have an excellent connection and we are live. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so I'm back live with Thunderous One, and we're going to be talking about the 90-foot atom, one of the Islamic myths. And also, by the way, Thunderous One's channel is the pinned comment in the live chat, and it's in the description. So please have a look at his channel. And welcome, Thunderous.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Lloyd. And thank you for having me on your channel yet again.
You're welcome. Thank you. Hey guys, so we should have fixed the echo issue that we had with Thunderous last week. And guys, so you know, once we finish with this, I will come back on at my usual time to do my Islamic terminology discussion. Actually, I need to prepare for that. I've had a very busy weekend. I just got back, so I should have an hour to prep for that to get my dictionary words ready. But yeah, I shall see you guys. So everyone, the audio is coming through okay? No one's having any issues? Okay, I guess we're good. So Thunderous, we're talking about the 90-foot atom. Do you want to introduce the topic for us, please?
Yeah, so Islam claims, or Muhammad claimed in several hadith, that Adam, the first man, was created 60 cubits tall. So we're going to have a look at that. Um, and the perspective that I have is to try to look at it with the biblical lens. So we're going to have a look at this with the biblical lens, using Islamic sources to try and come to some kind of, if you like, conclusion as to what's going on here. Um, yeah, so that's basically it for this evening.
All right. So yeah. So when I bring up your notes, I've got your PowerPoint up, and I've of course got a folder with those images you've sent me. So the Word document, sorry, is showing. So where would you like to start with this?
I can't see what's on the screen. So
You can play it on YouTube on your phone, but then of course just turn the volume down so we don't get the echo.
let me just bring that up then. Right, yes. So what we have here is the biological, if like, assessment of what it would be, or how it would be to have a human being that tall. The dimensions, the weight. I'm not going to say I'm too au fait with this kind of science. It was actually done for me by another channel, but just looking at those dimensions and the biology behind it, it's just impossible
Right.
to have an organic creature of those kind of epic proportions. Now, if you consider when dinosaurs were first unearthed in the late 1800s, the image was, as they were putting the fossilized bones together, where they were standing upright. But biology, in its understanding, has moved forward since then. So if you look at earlier imagery of, say, the Agonodon when it was first found, or Tyrannosaurus Rex, even in early, say, black and white movies of the Ray Harryhausen movies with stop-still graphics,
Yeah.
you have everything pretty much standing upright. But today, when you're looking at imagery of dinosaurs, you say, look at something like Jurassic Park, everything seems to be walking at a more horizontal angle. So they're more, the head's down towards more to the ground, where and the weight and the tail serves as a counterbalance to the
Right.
body mass. So biologists move forward in understanding that you can't have a creature standing upright. The blood pressures and such would be too much. The pressure on the heart, the pressure
Okay.
also within the
So that it
veins.
cannot pump vertically at that height, so it needs to be horizontal to pump the blood sideways.
That's right, exactly that. So those, for something that's more, say, scientifically minded, will be able to look at those and understand it better than I could. So I'm not going to pretend that I put that together, and I'm certainly not going to pretend that I understand it.
Right.
So
Okay.
so moving moving forward then with the 94 hour, I want to quote at least one hadith as our primary source. And the one I'm going to use is from Sahih Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 55, number 543. Of course, it's quoted again in Muslim, Sahih Muslim as well. But it goes on to say, narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, Allah created Adam, making him 60 cubits tall. When he created him, he said, go and greet that group of angels and listen to their prayer, for it will be your greeting and salutation. And the greetings of your offspring. So Adam said to the angels, Assalamu alaikum. The angels replied, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi. Thus, the angels added to Adam's salutation the expression of Wah rahmatullahi. Any person who will enter paradise will resemble Adam in appearance and figure. People have, this is the point I want to get to as well, people have thus been decreasing in stature since Adam's creation. So this, as I said, is also repeated in Sahih Muslim.
This is
So
crazy. I'm just showing this on the screen so people can see it. The people who followed him continued to diminish in size up to this day. So he who would get into paradise would get in the form of Adam. His length being 60 cubits. That's fascinating.
So that'd be 90 foot tall. What's equally fascinating with this as well is that had he left it at that, there's two issues with this hadith that, if you're looking at it from the biblical narrative, don't make sense. Now, for anybody that goes to my channel, they'll see today I've uploaded 6 episodes of the Islamic discussion on Adam that's only recently been released by Yasser Qadi. Now, prior to that, find any information on 94 Adam from Islam was virtually impossible. It's like the Muslims, it was like a no-go area, and Muslims did not want to comment on that, and for obvious reasons, because of the how are they going to reconcile this, not just with Islam, but how are they going to reconcile this with paleontology, archaeology, as well as biology? The sciences can't reconcile a human being of these proportions.
Just curious, is Islam by definition old Earth or new Earth? I'm not going to get into that discussion or argument, but does Islam by definition then assume that there's a young Earth or old Earth, or
Well, this is it. If you listen to Yasser Qadi, there's also other things I put on my channel where Islam seems to have this thing that the Earth was created and it was a battleground for jinns. They can eat, they can sleep. There were wars on the planet Earth. They were having children, and then God decided that I'm going to wipe Earth of these creatures. This is where I wanted to bring up a little bit of like looking at it from the prism of the biblical narrative. There's a couple of scriptures I wanted to introduce on this first, and one of them is 2 Timothy 3:16, which teaches all scriptures inspired of God are beneficial for teaching, for reproving, and for setting things straight. So if you was the teaching part would be to teach somebody who obviously doesn't understand the biblical narrative. The reproving would be to give correction. So, for instance, as an example, David erred when he committed adultery with Bathsheba. So he would have been, if you like, reproved from Scripture that his actions were wrong. For setting things straight is very much like, well, if you have this opinion and I have that opinion, let's use the Bible to see what the conclusive answer is. The Bible is the authority on what the answer is to the question. And 1 Corinthians 4:6 is another interesting one, because it talks about don't go beyond the things written. So we don't need extra sources or philosophy or other religions and their opinions to influence our opinion as to what the Bible teaches. The Bible is sufficient in itself for any question to be answered. We don't need to look for external answers as far as theology is concerned. Certainly, archaeology and biology can prove and give a better foundation, but it doesn't. We don't detract from the Bible because something outside of the Bible has helped us, is teaching us something. So when we look at the biblical narrative, there's very little spoken of about Adam. He's mentioned in chapter 2 and chapter 3, obviously, the first creation of the man. He dies in chapter 3, and hardly anything is mentioned thereafter. If anything, I think I only found maybe about 3 scriptures. 1 Timothy 2:14 and 1 Corinthians 15:22. So when you think about 39 writers, 66 books, covering a period of 1,500, well, they were written over a period of 1,500 years, but obviously covering Adam's creation to, say, the time of the end. And you can put everything together in basically what can come to, at best, 2 chapters. And there's very little in those 2 chapters about Adam per se. It's basically what he was made, what opportunities he had, and then what he did. It's like God doesn't want to talk about Adam too much.
Yeah, the
And when you
balance
just,
of Adam, if you read through what is not necessarily directly in the Talmud, but in the books that are commonly associated with the Talmud, you will find some discussion of Adam in various of the Jewish legends, myths, and narratives. And so that's the only other place where you can find more. And yeah.
yeah, absolutely that. So the other sources have will expand on what their opinions are, but from the biblical narrative, hardly anything is mentioned of him.
Mhm.
And there's something else as well in the Hadith. The Hadith says that he was made, but we also it was made and he had this stature. The alarming thing in this is that Islam teaches that Adam was made in heaven.
Right,
Why is
because
this a problem?
the difference is that the Garden of Eden was on earth, and Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden into the rest of earth, whereas in Islam, they've got the concept, like the Gnostic concept of paradise is in heaven, and Adam
Yes.
fell to the world of matter, just like the Gnostics believe.
And the alarming thing is this, is that when you look at the biblical narrative, the God of the Bible does not speak in that kind of way that that the spirit realm is anything like the physical realm. Depending on what sciences you believe, at the minimum, if we use the bare minimum, that we live in a four-dimensional universe, length, breadth, height, and time. Some would say gravity is another dimension, some would maybe add one or two more. But let's just stick with the minimum that is commonly accepted, which is four-dimensional existence. The spirit realm is outside of that existence. It's a totally different plane of existence. We don't even know how many dimensions there are in that. So Islam has a problem here because it's ascribing physical attributes to a physical dimension. For instance, if you could have access to the spirit realm, would height, length, and breadth have any meaning there? Would time have any meaning there? Bearing in mind, when the universe was created, there was no such thing as time. Time is a product of the creation of the universe. That is a fact, which is why you saw that many scientists are moving away from the Big Bang and using the term the beginning of space time. You can understand, well, why is all this relevant? But if we're looking at it from the point of view of the biblical narrative, if you go to something like the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 1, it talks about Ezekiel began to see visions. So when you go through the book of Ezekiel, you'll find like God rides a chariot with lots of wheels, and inside those wheels there are eyes. Well, clearly God doesn't have a chariot like that, but it's using visions, using metaphors and similes for human beings to understand what does the spirit realm look like. If you could imagine it. Satan is being described as being a very beautiful creature in Ezekiel 28:12. Well, Satan is not made of gold. He hasn't got a body made of a metal and encrusted with jewels. It's kind of like using the poetic language that if you could behold Satan, you would behold a very beautiful creature. Obviously, you would be because he was made from God's
You know,
own hand.
within the Hermetic traditions, within the Gnostic traditions, the gold has a very specific meaning because gold is the perfection of metal. Gold is the perfect element that you create. In fact, it alludes to the perfection of man. So gold is the perfection of the spirit, the creation of the perfected man, which is a lot of the pursuit of these Gnostic traditions, these secret, these what do you call them? These secret religions. That was the
Yeah.
whole point. And oddly, but that's a story for another day when I get into some of the other work regarding the guy we were talking about earlier. Let's go on. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So moving forward also on to First Kings chapter 18. If you read from verse 21 to 40, it's where Elijah is at Mount Carmel and he's mocking the Baal worshippers. But if you look at, say, verse 27, he mocks them by using physical attributes. For instance, maybe your God's tired. Is he on a journey somewhere? So in that scripture, we can see that physical attributes, and ascribing them to the spiritual dimension is something that the Bible actually mocks. The God of the Bible mocks it. His prophets clearly in that moment are mocking such a belief. So you can't ascribe physical realities to the spiritual dimension. For instance, if Adam was in heaven, well, in Islamic parlance, Adam's in heaven, and he's described as being physical. If you look at, say, the brothel that is Islamic heaven, rivers of wine, land of milk and honey, it's all spoken of in a very physical way. So how does that, does light exist there? Are there stars there? Are there animals there then? And if that's the case, then in what way is the reality of the spiritual dimension of Islam any different to the physical universe that we're living in now? I mean, is this some kind of bizarre multiverse that they're talking
Yeah,
about?
I mean, this is the rich man's paradise, right? It's like living in a palace with with all of the physical material things you'd want. But yeah, but
Yeah,
back to
but
your I was
so
thinking.
moving forward then on this, so a cubit, for those who are not familiar with it, a cubit is a measurement of 18 inches, which is typically taken from your elbow to your index finger. That's how previously, things were measured, and also like a handspan, which is
So
like,
elbow to index finger.
yeah, typically 18 inches.
Okay.
Okay. And a handspan is probably about 7 or 8 inches. It's from your thumb to your little finger. That would be a handspan. But that's how things were measured. So we know when Muhammad used the term 60 cubits, he was talking about something 90 foot tall. So so that's Adam in heaven. But the interesting point on this is that the Hadith turns around and says, had he left it at that, I think not many people would have commented on it. But it's the fact that the concluding part of the Hadith talks about people have been decreasing in stature since Adam's creation. And if you look at the word decreasing, that's an ongoing incremental stage process, increasing or decreasing, it's adding a little bit or subtracting a little bit per
Yeah.
per piece of time or
Yeah,
generation.
this one is wooded. Then the people who followed him continued to diminish in size up to this
Yeah.
day. So we're still
So,
diminishing in size. So
well, just before we get there, so the questions that we need to ask Islam is: how tall was Eve? What did they eat? How tall were the following generations, Cain and Abel, and subsequently the following generations after that? What has caused humans to shrink? What did they wear? Where are the fossils of 90, 80, 30, 40, even 24 or even 10-foot human beings? Where are the remains of giant homes, clothing, tools, weapons,
it's a
pots?
CIA cover up. It's a CIA cover up. We all know this. The
Uh,
Catholic Church destroyed all the buildings with dynamite, and they're hiding all of those 90-foot fossils in the Vatican in the basement.
because
You know it.
Islam.
I know it. We all know it.
So, Islam needs to, help us understand how did Adam's metabolism work? Why is it that 98% or 99% of Muslims are not actually aware of this teaching that Adam was 90 foot tall? And why is it then, of this, say, the 1 or 2% that know Adam, or Islam's teaching was Adam was 90 foot tall, seem to be somewhat reticent in mentioning it? So we'll just have a little bit of fun here then. So using Islamic genealogy, which is something that we use with the Islam and 124,000 prophets, let's see what we can work out with Adam's height then. So if we
Let's get to
give
the
Islam,
document. Yeah.
so
Yep.
if we get the genealogy as an example, right? So Adam was 90 foot tall, and in Islamic parlance, we have 21 generations from Adam to Muhammad, giving each generation a 5 foot decrease rate, right? And I don't think that that's being, unkind. I think giving each generation a 5 foot decrease rate is
Five
actually being
feet.
generous.
That's a huge height change.
It is, but that's being generous as well to help the Islamic belief system out. So if Adam was 90 foot tall, that would mean that Cain and Abel were 85 foot tall. And if we keep following it all the way down, depending on which genealogy you want to follow, because they place Abraham somewhere before or after. The numbers are always the same, 21 generations, but it's never sort of precise as to where Abraham is. But you still have Abraham between 40 and 55 feet, and Ishmael would have to be 35 to 40 feet tall. Do we see the problem now? That if you have 21 generations, Adam being 90 foot tall, and you give a 5 foot decrease rate per generation, none of this makes sense.
Right. So 5 feet is 1.524 meters. Right. So in other words, each generation lost 1.5 meters in height.
Yeah.
And if we take 90 feet, then Adam was 27.5 meters tall. So that is, yeah. And also, of course, you do know that the very early Islamic teaching that a nose can never be longer than 11 inches, right? Because if a nose is longer than 11, well, if a nose becomes 12 inches, then it becomes a foot.
Okay,
That was a joke.
okay. Wait,
Sorry.
okay.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so at least Islam is clear. We don't want to have a foot for a nose, right? Okay, so on the Word document that you've got all this information. So do you want to go through that, or do you want to continue with what you were saying? Because that would be a
So,
massive change. I mean,
yeah,
there would be a noticeable change per generation, and we would notice even 2 or 3 generations ago there was a significant. I mean, there'd be millions of people, right, of this height.
but But when you consider, for instance, as an example, metabolism, and if you consider a 90-foot tall human being, most food, if not all food, or say not all, but most food is at ground level. For instance, root vegetables and things like that, pumpkins, melons, and whatnot. They're all at ground level. If you think of the logistics of a human being 90 foot tall, most of his life will be spent on his hands and knees picking out bits of what at best could be, if you consider the size of, say, a watermelon or a pumpkin, it'd be analogous to a human being now having one of those sweets they call Skittles, in their hand. So the
Right,
pressure on his back and on his joints and on his knees at ground level, picking this food out to eat is one thing. Then we have to consider the volume of food that will need to be eaten in order to sustain the metabolism. Now, bearing in mind, Eve is going to be having children as well. So, how does Eve sustain herself during this period of time with pregnancy whilst trying to eat and maintain her metabolism as well as the metabolism of an infant that's grown in her womb, or several infants that are grown in her womb at subsequent points?
that is, there's some obvious issues, and I would
We would
want
also,
yeah.
yeah, we would also need to consider the logistics of clothing. How, for instance, would they go about making clothing? When you consider the intricateness of making clothing, even for, say, a human being that's 6 foot tall, it's not exactly an easy process to gather the materials required, plus the logistics of tools in order to make those clothings as well.
Right. No.
That's a problem.
Yeah, I think
Then
this
you
leads
have
to some obvious issues. Yeah.
then you have like the pots and the pans. Where are the evidences of human beings using? Can you imagine the size of a pot and a pan would be the size of a human being? We don't find any of these potteries and crockeries anywhere.
No, the
The
Smithsonian
homes.
Institute collected everything, and then the gray aliens picked up the rest with their spaceships.
It's a Jewish conspiracy, which is interesting about Jewish conspiracy because the imageries that you're going to be bringing up later, one of them is quite fascinating as far as Jewish conspiracies are concerned. So yeah, so we have to look at this with the biblical lens, as I've said, and none of this makes any sense. The interesting thing is going back to the 124,000 prophets. Um, when you look at the history of the planet and all of its major religions, the one common denominator that they all have is, as an example, there's probably a few, but one of the main ones is Noah's flood. Now, you can change certain features of Noah's flood, but in principle, everything's exactly the same. God was angry with the world as it was then. He asked a certain man or a certain family to build a boat. They got on the boat, the animals got on the boat. A giant storm came, filled the planet with water. Only they survived. The flood subsided. That's where the human family come from. You find that as a consistency. Yet in Islam, 124,000 prophets have gone out to the world, 123,999. Not one of them has ever spoken of human beings being this tall. You would expect to find
Mm.
a narrative through all the tribes and religions in the world speaking of something to support this, but
Yeah,
we
there
don't
are
find
exceptions within various legends and myths, even within biblical story of the
Nephilim.
sons of God, the Nephilim and such. But those are exceptions. Those are not the norm.
But even though those they're not 90 foot tall. I think the tallest one that I mean when you consider Goliath was only say I think 9 foot tall was he? When we look
Right.
at his cubit span, I think it was 6 cubits, which is about 9 feet. So even Goliath was only about 9 foot tall, and okay, fine, we don't have human beings that are 9 foot tall today, but it's not far off the imagination or too much of a stretch when you consider, say, for instance, Andre the Giant, the famous
Mm-hmm.
wrestler. There have been other human beings that have had a stature that's been quite big as well. So, but the thing is to see with Islam is when you use the word giant, and when you look at the biblical narrative and you use the word giants, with the biblical narrative, there is a certain biology that's not a stretch, not too much of a stretch of the imagination. It might be hard to believe, but we know that with what we know of science is that it fits with the biblical narrative. But Islam is given a totally different if you like, slant on it. The interesting thing is with Yasser Qadi, he is spoken of it. And if you go to, for instance, on my channel, I've loaded six, because it's a 10-part series, and I've loaded six today. Two of them, five and six, actually discuss 90 for Adam. And the interesting thing is the number of excuses or options that Islam are making available as to how to reconcile this with reality. And one of them, and there are many, I was going to write them all down. One of them was that somehow Jews have infiltrated the Hadith, and it's actually a Jewish tradition that somehow fitted inside the Hadith, and this is where it comes from. So it's not actually Adam. One of the scribes have written down this Jewish tradition, and it somehow manifests itself in the Hadith. So it's an amazing stretch that Yasser Qadi is putting forward as to how to reconcile Muhammad's claim of 90 from
Yeah.
Adam.
No, and so much just mentioned, and it's a good point that Goliath was. I mean, David versus Goliath. Goliath was considered a giant, and Goliath was a little bit of a couple of meters tall. Now, he would not have been a giant if everyone else was 10 meters tall. If there was such a discrepancy. So, clearly there's an issue in terms of what we have in the biblical story and the Islamic narrative. And I wonder how they're going to explain this away. That's very curious to me. Um,
But And which is interesting because when you say how they're going to explain this way, well, this is what they've avoided to do thus far is not explain it. I have not come
mm,
across any explanation. I've found excuses, which is what we're going to go to when you bring up the imagery, and I'll go through each one.
yeah.
But you won't find
Do you want to do
explanation.
the images or
Yeah, so
the Word document that you have with all the notes?
I'm going to be honest with you. The Word document is the Word document. As I've said at the beginning, it was put forward for me.
Let's just read through it quickly. Let's just clarify with it. Let's just read it through so everyone can get an idea. Would that be okay? And then we can go
Yeah,
to the
sure.
images. So these are biological notes on the plausibility of a 90-foot atom. It says here the weight increases by the cube of the increase in height. So height is one-dimensional, whilst weight is a function of volume, which is three-dimensional.
Hmm.
So a 90-foot tall human would be 15 to the power of 3 equals 3,375 times as heavy as a normal human. So that means the stress on the joints would be incredible.
Yeah.
So, and also, I mean, he wouldn't just be 90 foot tall; he'd be 30 feet wide. And then, assuming a 6 foot human weighs 170 pounds. Okay, so what's 170 pounds in kilograms? That's let's divide by two. Let's just call it 80 kilograms, right? Then the 90-foot human would weigh 573,750 pounds or 261 metric tons. Wow. Wow, that's so how many calories do you think that human would need? He'd probably need a few energy bars and a couple of Red Bulls every day. So the cross section of the leg, the knee of a 6 foot human, assume 12.5 square inches, which is 25 square inches for two legs. The cross section increases with the square of the height. So it increases by a factor of 225. So the cross section of the knee of a 90-foot human would be 225 times 12.5 times 2 is 5,625 square inches or 3.6 square meters in total. So a 1.8 square meter cross section on the knee. So that's 1,800. So what's the square root of 1,800? Um, yeah, but that you'd be looking at 12 times 12. Good grief. No, it's 100. Okay, so it's going to be huge. He's going to have a knee that's going to be massive. So you're looking at a knee that's huge. with a normal human, the pressure on the bones of the legs is approximately 170 divided by 25 is 6.8 pounds per square inch. Um, I speak human, which is kilograms, so all this is Greek to me, but for the 90-foot human, the pressure on the bones of the legs is 102 pounds per square inch. So the pressure on the leg bones of the giant is 15 times that of the normal human. So yeah, so this is going to be a serious problem, because I heard stories about that. Apparently, some of the largest dinosaurs were enormous, and modern animals cannot grow that big because of a limitation imposed by gravity,
Yeah.
which puts weight on the bones and the blood pressure. Now, apparently, the only solution, according to what I've read, the only solution for getting animals as big as they were in the past is that gravity was different. That's how gravity has increased. So in the past, we must have had a different gravity. That's how those animals could be that heavy and still move.
And also
And
oxygen. Can I just add on that
say,
oxygen levels would have been different as well, because if you consider the size of the nostrils of those creatures, their breathing mechanism would have been totally different. So the oxygen content on Earth at that time would have been totally different to the oxygen that we have now.
yeah, so there's obviously going to be different additional biological limitations and requirements that's not even covered by this. So, I mean, yeah, we're looking at some incredible engineering here. So either the gravity was totally different, but then again, we still lack the specimens. We don't have millions and millions of human bones that, yeah.
And then in Islamic parlance, when you're considering millions of bones, we don't need millions. Even if they only had one sort of like one generation or one pair per generation, still getting up to Abraham, you would still expect to find human beings or remains of human beings or evidences of human beings of that stature existing, i.e., not just their bones, but evidences like homes, clothes, pots and pans, tools, and weapons as well. Because when you look at the Islamic narrative, all these men from Adam down to Muhammad seem to be great warriors as well. They're killers. You know, they're involved in many scuffles and violences. So we would expect to see weapons of those proportions as well. But just going back to your point about creatures of the past, it's interesting to note as well that even with big things like I think it's the Brachiosaurus, for example, they've now recognized in the movement of its neck, there were hollow chambers where air was stored, air sacs were stored. Therefore, using so that its body movement would have been used in, say, a form of hydraulics. Um, and also, when you get to a certain size, you'll find that those creatures, unless they're in water, like the blue whale, which serves as a counterbalance as well, they're all walking on all fours. They're not walking upright as
Upright.
two-legged creatures.
Right, right.
You know, so the mass is spread between, they're quadrupeds, they're not bipeds.
Yeah, and I've got someone says that during the time of the dinosaurs, there was 30% more oxygen.
Yes.
And someone else says this hadith claims that Muslims will have the length of 60 forearms in total. So yeah, I mean this is now. I mean, of course, they're going to have to throw the hadith under the bus. They're going to have to throw Bukhari and Muslim under the bus. But yeah,
But this is going back to where I was in the process of writing down all the excuses or options available to Islam that Yasser Qadhi was putting forward as to how to reconcile this, because it's in Bukhari, it's in Hadith, they've got no choice but to accept it. Hence why one of the alternatives is, well, maybe a Jewish tradition has somehow crept its way into the Hadith, and this is where we get it
but the
from.
Israeliyat, in fact, the hadith originally, the original hadith in Islam was what they called the Israeliyat, which are all the Jewish
Yeah.
traditions. And then they eventually stated that they will no longer use the Jewish traditions, but use their own. So then they replaced all of the original Jewish hadith, or in theory, with these Islamic traditions. So those Jewish stories were part of the Islamic tradition.
It's interesting you use that terminology because that's exactly what Yasser Qadhi says. So it seems quite timely that we're having this discussion at a time when Yasser Qadhi's just finished the series on Adam, which is quite bizarre because if you listen to the series, at one point he actually says that when Allah created Adam, Adam was hollow. He was just a shell in heaven. He was hollow. He had no intestines or anything. It's really bizarre. And it's almost like details that you don't need or don't want. Why would Islam go into these kind of bizarre lengths? But it is Islam, so this is what we're to expect.
Okay, yeah, no. So yeah, I've got those images you spoke of, those photos. Should I bring those up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So where do you want to start? Because I've got them
Just start top left and then just sort of work it through to the bottom one. The last one is with the top down view of the skeletons. The last one I wanted.
Doricetus, yeah. So
So that is kind of like just giving an image of what we're actually dealing with here as well. You know, the size and of
wow, they're not
man,
even as wide as his knee.
not as what. Yeah, exactly that. I don't mean to sound crude or anything like that, but even he obviously impregnated Eve, so he would have had to have had an erection. And can you imagine the blood pressure of sustaining an erection of a man of that stature and that size? Elephants have to have bits of bone inside their penis to navigate it. I'd
Wow.
be
So
interested to
there's a lot
know.
of biological issues here that are very hard to navigate. So they would need to. I wonder what the source origin of this story is. I mean, how they came up with the story. Where did they get this? In what mythical tradition did they derive this?
I think it's feasible that with Islam, you find that there's certain things are mentioned in the Bible. You have to bear in mind that Muhammad couldn't read or write, so he would have just been listening to stories. So when the word giants, maybe talking about, say, the Nephilim, maybe talking about Goliath, whatever the context was, or whatever the story was he was listening to, he's probably used the word giants and not thinking that in comparison to, say, someone that's 8 or 9 feet tall and applying it to that. He's probably thinking in the literal sense, Gulliver's Travels, like a giant, of King Kong proportions, which is what we have here.
Right.
So that's kind of like giving you a visual aid as to what we're dealing with here. And yeah,
I'm
it
just.
just it doesn't make sense.
It's a nice 60 cubits, 90 feet, roughly 32. Well, it only had 27 meters, but yeah. So tell me when to move forward to the next image.
Then next one, yeah, just the next one.
Now I've got the two Earths.
That'll be a good one to look at. Right, the reason why I put that in there is because one of the excuses I've been listening to over the years, one is to bear in mind, I've been trying to get an answer from Islam for about 15 years on this, is that they say that the Earth is was smaller. Now that in itself poses problems, which we'll go to in the other image. But I just wanted to sort of show that the Earth, if you reduce the size and mass of the Earth,
Then all the
you're
continents actually
shifting.
fit into each other
Yeah. Yeah, so the continents will fit. So the water, where did so where was the water with the
inside the
smaller Earth?
planet.
And where, yeah, but the volume of them, so that would mean hollow Earth then, because if the water was inside the Earth and then the Earth expanded, that means, and the water came from inside the Earth, logic dictates then Islam must be teaching that the Earth is hollow or made of cheese.
Or it's a factory that produces hydrocarbons and other things inside. But yeah, I've read quite a bit about the idea that the Earth expanded. I've seen some of the stories about that, and there seems to be some credibility potentially to it. But yeah,
If we go to, yeah, but okay, but what we'll do, we'll discuss the credibility if we go to the next one where you have the series of Earths, three or
okay, let
four.
me find that. So okay, here's a series of Earths. Yep,
Yeah, there's about three or four in a
yep, got
row.
it.
That one.
Yes,
Right, if you look at that as an example, right, what you're seeing there is a small planet as it expands until you get to the size that it is now. Now, the argument they're suggesting is that the smaller the planet, the less the gravitational pull. And that seems to kind of a logical sense that the smaller the mass, the smaller the effect. And we see that with the moon. But the problem they've got there is that if you're reducing the size or the mass, you're also increasing the distance as it is now from the surface of the sun to the surface of the earth. It doesn't matter how close the earth is. If you're reducing the mass and it's still where it is now, you're reducing the distance. If you're reducing the distance, you're also reducing the effect of the water cycle on the mass. Sorry, the heat. So the heat cycle, sorry, the water cycle as an effect. So the effect of heat on Earth would change as well. So the structure that we have, the size of the Earth's circumference in relation and proportion to the Sun would differ greatly. So the biology would be
would
totally
be different.
different.
Yeah, can I
So
mention?
the
Well,
biology couldn't sustain
can I?
an ecosystem of vegetation.
But it has changed. I mean, we have had different vegetation over the years. I mean, from if you look back in time, but
But,
that so
but
Veronica, the
the,
one other
but okay,
question.
but when you're going forward, say for instance from the small one to the big one, if I have an empty balloon and I blow into the balloon, I'm taking mass from one location and transferring it to another location. So you can see where the mass came from, the air, it's gone into my lungs and I've transferred it to the balloon. Yeah. If the Earth has expanded, where did the extra mass come from? And how did the extra mass continue to create, if you like, or evolve into
Yeah.
still a spherical Earth? And then you have the
Yeah,
problem
there
with where
was.
did the water come
Just give me
from?
1 second. There's a question from Veronica in terms of the expanding Earth theory. There's an interesting series of videos on YouTube that you can watch called the expanding Earth. So the continents are what they call these tectonic plates, and there are gaps between these plates. And magma, which is created from within the core of the Earth, well, because it's hot inside, magma, liquid molten rock, pushes up, and it spreads, and it causes these tectonic plates to slide aside as the new magma pushes up and
Yeah.
pushes the plates outwards, and then the planet expands in this fashion.
I
So have a look
but
at
the
it, and
mass
that's the theory anyway within
uh,
that idea. Yeah.
I've looked at that. So the problem I have with that is you're still trying, what that means if the magma is the mass, then where the magma is coming from is creating an empty vacuum. And it's also doing it wonderfully, splendidly spherical. I would counter argue that with what's known as the hydroplate theory, which is the Earth is still the same size, and much of what we see in the ecosystem today taking place is a byproduct of Noah's flood, because the flood waters are still here. That is a reality, but that's a discussion for another time. But for me personally, the flood waters are still here, and what we're seeing with volcanoes and mountain ranges are nothing more than the shift of the tectonic plates. With the pressure of that volume of water on there, because one thing that people
Mm.
tend to miss with Noah's flood, they think that the water is coming from the sky all the time, and it does, right? Most of it. But there's also water underneath. It says the springs will burst forward from the earth. So there's a lot of water that was in the earth that came forward from the earth that were also contributed to the flood waters
Yeah.
that went
There's
subsided
also,
back to those
if you
pockets.
look at some of the research done, for instance, on the creation of oil, like it's been commonly assumed that oil is manufactured within the earth. That's what the evidence tends to indicate.
Yeah.
That the earth is a factory and it produces things like diamonds. It produces oil. So that the earth is a chemical factory. So it creates these things and then they push up towards the surface. So there is
Yeah,
some evidence that the earth can produce water internally. In fact, water has been located like as far as 600 kilometers down below the crust. So
exactly
the earth
that.
does produce chemicals inside of it.
Yeah, I said that there are water vats. They found water vats under the giant land masses and under mountain
Mm.
ranges and such.
Yeah.
Oil now, I think they use the term fossil fuel. I think that they've dug themselves a hole there. They've got no
That doesn't
choice
seem
but
to.
because the Russians don't use the term fossil fuel when
Neither do
referring
the
to oil.
Swedish. They all did the research and they've determined oil is abiotic. It's created from chemical process under the crust.
It seems to serve as a buffer, like when God created the earth, the oil volume or mass serves as a buffer, almost like as a layer in the multiple layers that the tectonic plates are sitting on.
Mm. Yeah. So back to the so we've done the four images of the Earth and was
So basically, what I'm saying there is the expanding Earth seems too much of a far stretch and doesn't sit
mm.
with,
Well
say,
the
the
fact is
relation.
though that if you do shrink the Earth, the continents do fit together. I mean
Yeah,
there is that.
but we don't have to have a smaller Earth for the tectonic plates to fit. Pangea is another option, which is where the Earth was one landmass anyway.
Right.
So
Right. That's also true. Yeah. A good
yeah,
point. Okay. Do
but
you want to move to the next image
yeah,
or?
yeah, just bring up whatever's next. But the last one is the image, the top down view of. So just bring up whichever one.
So hold on. What I've got is let me actually just see what we have here. We've got the 90 foot. Let me just bring this one up. This is the multiple Allah created Adam, making him 60 cubits tall, and this is the one of the 90 feet, 65, 50, 40, 30, and so on. Why then have we never found any of the giant human-like skeletons?
But also the reason why I put that image there is that it kind of shows you the logistics and the problems that we're not just talking about the biology of human beings of that stature. We're also talking about the logistics. The logistics often get forgotten in these types of discussions. So the logistics of making the clothes, the equipment that they will need to have made, to make those clothes, to prepare the food, the pots, the pans, the weapons, the homes. It's the
Hmm.
logistics that add to the problem and dilemma that Islam has with this claim. So it's kind of like to give like a visual problem, a visualize
Yeah, no,
overview.
exactly. You'd have to make clothing, and yeah, how? Yeah, I mean, if you consider the size of this person with the regular people down here on the bottom, that's a huge issue. To find the resources to clothe people, if everybody was that big, yeah, that's
And
incredible.
you will need to find evidences of those clothes still around as well. So where are they buried, or where are they sort of like scraps of pieces of clothing?
Yeah,
Where are
so
the
yeah, so I've got this one with the dinosaur and the 30-meter man and an 18-meter tall brontosaurus, and then
yeah?
you've got Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim.
So that kind of shows you as well the issue that Islam has with a creature that big. We know those creatures that big actually walked more horizontally than vertically. So the emphasis there was that the biology of it doesn't make sense with an upright man. And the other reason I mentioned that was well because one of the arguments that Muslims will have is, well, we know great creatures lived on the planets that you don't have a problem with those creatures because we've got evidences of those creatures, but it's almost like they're conflating. The biology of those creatures is now understood to be different than what was
Yeah,
first believed when they were first found. For instance, iguanodon standing vertical. We now know that these creatures walked more stooped forward with the tail serving as a counterbalance.
right. If you look at a giraffe today, the giraffe has very, very special biology to deal with its blood vessels in the neck. Apparently, those are
Yes.
heavily reinforced. So
I,
yeah, this would require different biology within humans.
I think one of the amazing things about the giraffe, because I think there's a book called The Giraffe's Neck, and it talks about like the vertebrae, how
Yeah,
wonderful the vertebrae is, but it also talks about the heart, the size of the heart, the blood vessels going up the neck, but also the pressures that will be required to pump the blood to the brain of that creature.
right. This image is now blue and green, and it's got the water volume, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so that was more a case of, it's just like a visual aid to help understand where would the water come from. If you've got an expanding earth, the way in the Muslim model, I'm using the Muslim model because as
Hmm.
far as the expanding earth is concerned, it seems with Muslims, they'll find something in the past or some kind of, say, science or theory or postulation that they've got a problem and they'll find something in the scientific world and think, oh, there's the answer to our problem. We'll just use that in order to support where we sit on the matter. So they've got this problem with 90 for Adam. And it's not that Islam has come together and said, right then, maybe the earth was smaller in the past, less gravity. That's why humans know. They've actually found something in that's been postulated in the scientific world and used that as some kind of counter defense for 94 Adam. But it still doesn't answer the problems of photosynthesis and the vegetation and the volume of vegetation that would have been required for a human being to be sustained of that size.
Yeah, how would he eat grapes, for instance, if his hands are that big and grapes are that small? Yeah. So we've got now this you've got this 90-foot Adam again with a picture of the chemise and humans. I mean, that would be. Is this true? You've got this chemise
No,
with
that's
this
just that's a
frame.
Photoshop. That's just a
Okay.
Photoshop image of yet again giving the visuals of what you're dealing with
Yeah.
as
That.
far as logistics are concerned.
I mean, you'd have stories. You'd have legends. You'd have. Um, yeah, I've got 90-foot Adam set in stone. Yeah, this actually is an. I can't remember this guy's name offhand, but he's South African, and this actually is in South Africa. This image is literally, it's a real image. It's in South Africa in a rock.
Yeah, the thing is, you see, it's not only Islam that has this problem. There are other religions as well where they find something in nature and they automatically have some kind of, there's a word for it where you see like a religious significance if you see something in nature. For
Michael
instance,
Tellinger. Yes, yes, yes.
where you see something in nature and you automatically think that it's a sign from God. For instance, there was the famous case that was covered in the TV series 14 TV or 14 Times, where a Muslim cut open the tomato and the veins spelt the word Allah. Well, it didn't. It's just the angle that he got the tomato at. But according to Islam, it's a miracle that Allah put his name in the tomato. Or there's a tree that stooped at a certain angle in in one image, and it's doing prayers, it's prostrating itself in a prayer. There are so many bizarre things. It's a little bit like, somebody picked up a pork scratching and it looked like Mary holding the baby Jesus. There's a word for seeing this kind of like religion and seeing it as religious symbology.
I think
That's
it's
just a
called
piece of rock.
pareidolia. I think that's one of the names of it, pareidolia.
Yeah. So that there is just where Muslims have used that image as a defense that human beings were 90
Yeah,
foot tall.
but how tall would a man be if his feet were this big? Would he be 90 foot? Would he be 20 foot,
No,
30 foot?
it doesn't matter how big he was. It's just physically impossible for a human being to. But it's also one, it's impossible for a human being to be that size. Two, how can you get a footprint in rock if it
Well,
was soft?
yeah, the
If,
story is that this was sometime hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago. This was clay or some other kind of softer sand substance, which then hardened into rock. Because you've got obviously the toe print, you've got the one, two, three, four toes there, and you can see that this is like the mud pushing out. But yeah, and I've watched this video a few times in the past. Yeah,
yeah, I don't accept that. I just think it's one of those sort of like anomalies that you see in nature that people are ascribing some kind of relevance to or trying to use to support their claim. I personally don't see that.
yeah, and then let's see, we've got this next image, which in Photoshop, you've got the crane, you've got the digger, rather the
Yeah, that was just I just added that in there, just kind of show you the logistical problems of burying a 90-foot tall man or a
actually
human
right,
being.
the graves. You're very correct.
It's kind of the logistics. It's clearly Photoshop. It doesn't make sense, but yet again, it gives you the visual image of that's just a skull. It'll be impossible for human beings of our size to move a skull. I should imagine of that size. The logistics yet again.
Again, yeah, true. If there were thousands of these people, we would have found at least one by now, one
Yeah.
would think. Yeah. Well, that does lead to certain questions and certain issues. No, fair point. And then you've got this last image, the 90-foot Adam. Uh,
Right. That one's my favorite one because that was actually the first one I ever came across, and that was about 15 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, maybe. Betsy Ross was familiar with this as well, funnily enough. She knew more about it than me. She gave quite a few bits more detail that I'd totally forgotten or didn't know. Now, this image appeared about 17 years ago. Now, at the time, I didn't have the presence of mind, if you like, to actually take an image of it and store it, because I never thought in 15, 16 years' time I'll be doing the discussion on 90-foot Adam in Islamic parlance. Now, what this is I think it's a guy called Ali Sina. He's had several channels or YouTube web pages over the years, and he put out a hoax. 94 Adam found, or a Jewish biologist or doctor or Jewish scientist confirms 94 Adam, and what he did, he put it out there to see how quick the Muslim world would latch onto the hoax in order to support. And it's amazing because when you find these things, it's always a Jewish or a Christian scientist that comes along and supports the claim of Islam. It's never say a Muslim scientist confirms Islam. It's always the atheist, the Muslim, or the Christian scientist that comes along and testifies to the authenticity of Islam. Never a Muslim. Do we not see a pattern drawing,
no,
being done
correct.
there?
I mean, it's very much conspiracy theory. Uh,
But that was done 17 years ago, and that's where I mean, that one is quite good. That image is quite good. What it was, I think they were building something, and I forget what because he showed the real image in later on as to where he got it from and how he doctored it.
yeah, but as H.K. Fooey also says, I mean, as everyone knows, there are no Muslim scientists.
Yeah. No, yeah, 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 absolutely. Only in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, no, but so yeah, this that's pretty funny though. Guys, by the way, Betsy Ross is very very ill, so please pray for her. She's been in hospital for some time. She's very weak, and she does need your prayers and concerns. So please keep in your prayers tonight and pray for healing. Um, yeah, she's also she's suffering like my dad was, and so yeah, keep in your thoughts and prayers, please.
Yeah, if you're listening, Betsy, I hope you're okay. Someone's put in the chat there, what's an oxymoron? Dark light, that's an oxymoron. Final
Muslim
Fantasy.
scientist. So yeah, that's maybe not fair, but
I was leading up to that, Dark Light, Final Fantasy VII, police intelligence, or Muslim scientist.
government efficiency.
Yeah.
um,
You've stolen my thunder.
yeah, I know on that point. Actually, hold on. Let me see if I. So I wonder if I take this away, I need to get rid of that. Actually, you know what? I need to have a look quickly on
So,
something about science in Islam. But yes, you were saying.
yeah, so just looking at this, when you consider that the biblical narrative, 39 men, 66 books, written over 1,500 years, covering from Adam's creation, if you like, in the physical sense, to where we are now, and very little, if anything, is mentioned about Adam. That should show you something about God's attitude towards Adam as to what he did. When you consider Islam, and Yasser Qadhi's released like 8 hours over 10 videos of material over Adam, you have to ask the question, where has all this extra material come from and why?
Well, yeah, they're not handing it out like candy now, are they? Just a
But,
deviation from this before we get back to that. We mentioned science, and Josie was literally trying to disprove Islam with truth, facts, and common sense. The Islamic ideology is antithetical to truth, fact, and common sense, and that's the truth. Um, yeah. So, guys, just briefly to talk about science. So, this is an article which is on the web. I can discuss it at some point. This one is why the Arabic world turned away from science, and of course, on the lost golden age and the rejection of reason, and they've never been part and parcel or hand in hand with reason. But just briefly, Muslim countries have 9 scientists, engineers, and technicians per 1,000 people, compared with a world average of 41. In these nations, there are 1,800 universities, but only 312 of those have scholars who have published journal articles. Of the 50 most published of these universities, 26 in Turkey, 9 in Iran, 3 in Malaysia and Egypt. Pakistan is 2, and Uganda and the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kuwait, Jordan, and Azerbaijan have 1. There are roughly 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, but only 2 scientists from Muslim countries have won Nobel Prizes in science, one for physics in 79 and the other for chemistry in 99. 46 Muslim countries combined contribute just 1% of the world's scientific literature. Spain and India each contribute more of the world's scientific literature than those countries together. So, Spain translates more books in a single year than the entire Arab world has in the past 1,000 years. Okay? So, understand there's a little bit of a gap in terms of Islamic science. This is worth a discussion at some point.
Yeah,
So, understand. So, there's just if you read through this, I mean, it's just a huge lack of, shall we say, science in the Islamic world.
I think that's quite deliberate because the thing, if you look at science within Islam, when you consider what Islam espouses as being science, and then you actually study science,
It's
it's
the
clear.
Quranic sciences, the religious sciences. It's not science.
Yeah, 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 absolutely that. And there's going to be a disconnection there where the person studying the science, if he makes a comment, then he may as well write his own will. We know how zealous Islam can be. If you say anything, even slightly alluding to that the Quran or the Hadith are wrong in any of the
Yeah,
sciences, then you're basically writing your own death sentence. So one
yeah,
has to be so because I find it very hard to believe that in 1.6 billion human beings in all the countries that Islam is manifest, that there are as human beings, it's not as human beings we are deficient in intelligence or creativity or fascination with the environment that we live in. We've been designed by that, like that, to be like that with the God that has created us. So to find and being made in God's image, I find it very hard. I think what causes the problem is Islam and the fear factor of Islam. So one, Islam, what Islam does, it denies people access to information. We already know that that is being censored. You know, we know in Islam, and then the information that you do have has to be in line with the Islamic theology. Now, I'm going to quote a book by Douglas Sachs. It's called Undeniable. At the very beginning of the book, and he appears much on the
Yes, I know. I know Douglas Sachs. Yeah.
yeah, he wrote a book, and I've got at the beginning of his book, I've got the book, and he talks about that in the atheistic evolutionary mindset of biology, you have to suppress the inclination of design. So when you're looking at the genetic level that these scientists look at, you are encouraged or browbeaten into not coming to the conclusion of design when you're looking at the intricate nature of biology in the way that we're made.
Yeah, I've
That's
actually read
been
Signature in the Cell. I've read Darwin's Doubt as well. I've actually read, I think, Darwin's Black Box, and I've read The Devil's Delusion. It was
yeah.
really, really good. David Belinsky, brilliant writer.
Yeah. Yeah, got that. Very sarcastic in that book as
Yeah,
well, and he calls it the landscape. I think in the latter part of the book he calls it. He uses the phrase, "Anything is better than nothing. Nothing is better than God." So that he talks about like all the variations of the landscape, as he calls it, about how the
yeah,
science is proposing the universe came about, and then you have the nothing, which is the Lawrence Krauss that the universe has come by nothing, which is actually not actually true. Even in his own book, it's not true. It's a universe within a universe, but that's another subject. But the point being, any of these scientific proposals about where the universe come from is better than nothing, right? But nothing is still, that the universe came from nothing is better than saying it was by God.
yeah,
What does
yeah.
it teach you? So if atheism can browbeat and intimidate the inclination of a human being to see design, which is the way that we've been designed to see, the manifestation of Romans 1:20, if you look at that scripture, then you can imagine exactly the same things going on in the Islamic world, where Islam makes these claims, scientific claims, and they can't be challenged. It's almost like you have to create a science or develop a science that fits the Islamic narrative. You know, for
Yes.
instance, you know, the drinking of camel urine, for instance, is supposed to be a cure for problems with his stomach. And I've got that on my channel as well. The benefits of camel urine. There's quite a few scholars for dollars talking about that. And one of them saying, if the Quran says it, even if we don't so if the Hadith says it and we don't understand it, we don't deny it.
It's not what it says, it's what it means, and it doesn't mean what it says. You just don't understand it. I know it says kill them, but it doesn't mean that. You're just misunderstanding.
Yeah, yeah, you misunderstood it because Arabic is such a special language. Of the 1.7 billion human beings on the planet, even if you grossly exaggerate the figure, only probably about 10, 15,000 people actually read it as fluently because the Quraysh dialect is now all but extinct and only in the Quran. And then you have the miracle of rhetorical devices where one word can mean 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 different things. So you can just reinvent it as time moves forward and and exposes it.
Yeah. No, so that was very that's very interesting. I mean, to think about this 90-foot atom, to really give it some thought, and I mean, maybe they should literally just rename it to the Da'if Bukhari or the Maudu Bukhari and the Maudu Muslim as opposed to Sahih, because they need to decide, because every single hadith in that collection is supposed to be Sahih, so they need to maybe reappraise that and go like, okay, actually 99% of the hadith actually are faked, are false, are weak. But then again, that actually is the case because only a very small percentage of the hadith are accepted. The other 2 million are all said to be inauthentic.
Mm. And the interesting thing is, I think it's Ibn Hajar, 13th, 14th century, something like
Askalani, yeah?
that.
Yeah.
Ascalani, that's right. He comments about 90-foot Adams, one of the things I read many years ago. But for me was, why are they questioning it 700 odd years later, 800 years later? So for the first, say, 600 years of Islamic history, they were obviously believing that this human being was real. So yet again, you have to go, if Islam is the final testimony of truth with God's relationship with
Mm.
mankind, why are so many errors being believed for
It's
about
myth because it's
1400
Gnostic
years?
myth, because it's based on Gnostic myth. In fact, the major Gnostic source behind it is what looks to be Manichaeism, and that seems to be the major source. In fact, Manichaeism seems to have inspired both Hinduism as well as Islam. They both come from a similar Gnostic source. Now, of course, they're both syncretic, or at least Islam is syncretic. It steals from other religious views, and it steals symbolism, it steals argumentation, it steals things, but it is Gnostic in its source at the end of the day. And I'll do a show on that in the future to talk about the parallels between Hinduism, Islam, and the source Gnosticism, which is Manichaeism. Manichaeism is today known as, you'll still find it thrown. In fact, the Sabaeans, that's what they talk about in the Quran. You can find them today. They're called the Mandeans. That's their modern name, the Mandeans. But obviously they seem to have changed somewhat. But anyway, we'll get into that another time. So, yeah. So is that everything? I think we've probably finished the discussion on that. But that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's it. There's not really much to talk about with 90 for Adam. It's just more that for me, it's more a case of the logistics. The logistics of such a story do not fit at any level you care to look at it.
Yeah. No. So yeah, it looks like Islam is crumbling under investigation. And I mean, they not remember they have the red line, Yasakadi's red line. We don't have that red line, so we're going to look at these things, and it's myth. That's why the Quran is useless as a tool in archaeology. The New Testament, the Old Testament, are useful tools in archaeology. They allow archaeologists and historians to find things, to verify things, right? Whereas Islam, the Gnostic Gospels, they have zero archaeological value because they've got zero attachment to reality. They are myth, entirely myth. So,
In, about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, if someone's in the chat, they might want to quickly look at that. I think it was in Leicester or Coventry. They were building a car park for a supermarket. What happens in England is that when certain things are being dug, they will have archaeologists present to look at what they may unearth there. Maybe something Roman, some Roman history, coins, or maybe an old building or something, some kind of site. And what they found was Richard III's bones, which is quite interesting. Um, Yet in Mecca, which is supposed to be the seat of Islam, they're not uncovering anything.
no,
They're burying it in concrete.
yes,
The holiest place on earth for Islam, where all the evidence should be, and all they want to do is pour concrete all over it and not
nothing.
and nothing there.
Yeah, I know. That's a big red flag. So, guys, yeah, we should end up here. Um, so yeah, that was fascinating. Are you going to join me later when I do my discussion on Islamic terminology? Or
Not tonight. I would love to have done had you warned me earlier.
sorry, I should have told you. Yeah, I try and do this every Sunday. I'm a little tired tonight. I just came back from a long journey, just a long drive. But yeah, then definitely for next week we can do something again.
Yes.
You know.
Absolutely, I would love to. Would love to, and I appreciate the comments that have been coming in the audience as well. So I'll take this opportunity to say goodbye to the audience. Thank you, and look forward to appearing on the show at some other time.
Yeah, and guys, before I go, I just want to say thank you to Marek. This is his blog, islamblog.pl. So for those of you who are Polish, and I know I have some Polish followers, he writes some very interesting blog. He writes very interesting articles. So I want to let you guys know about it. Promote this as well to those who speak Polish, and some great content. As you can see, he's been busy. So yeah, thank you to Marek for all the hard work. And guys, thank you very much for being part of this tonight. Yeah, apparently none of the major civilizations referred to Mecca prior to the 7th century. Exactly, it didn't exist before that. And yeah, no, some man, you've brought up some really important questions for us to ask. You brought up some issues that are so obvious. You know, it's these are not just stones in the shoe for Islam. These are some serious red flags, and they need to justify their beliefs by discussing some of these things and showing us the evidence. But thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Thunderous. Yeah. So, guys, any last questions before we go? Okay, I guess not. No. So, anyway, guys, thank you. Good night. I'll see you guys in a little while. Thank you, Thunderous, man. Much appreciated. And we'll see you guys next time. See you in a while. Bye.
Bye bye.